At the side of our bungalow we have this metal gate which doesn't really provide much privacy or security, so in this video I'm going to be making a new gate to replace it. So first I took some measurements for the width of the opening and also the height from the floor up to where the bottom of the archway starts, and also the height of the archway itself, which I did by measuring from my spirit level. To make the gate I'm going to be using MDF, and I know what you're thinking, MDF outside, are you crazy? Well, this is a special type of MDF made by Medite SMARTPLY, who this video is in collaboration with. It's called Tricoya Extreme and it's guaranteed for 50 years externally when used above ground, and with a service life of around 60 years, meaning that without sounding too bleak, with a little bit of maintenance every few years, this gate should outlast me. To learn more about Medite SMARTPLY products, get technical advice and win some incredible prizes, check out the members area, link down below in the description box. So here I'm marking up the width and the height of the door onto the MDF, and originally my plan to draw the arc at the top was to find the centre point across the width of the gate, add a nail there, tie on a piece of string, and I could use that to draw the arc. And I had a few attempts at that, but ultimately wasn't really happy with the results. So I thought that was going to work, but I just can't get my arc to join up with the marks that I've made, so something's off. So what I'm going to do is just cut it straight, and then I'm going to offer it up to the opening and actually scribe the arc onto the workpiece. So after cutting the gate to width using my plunge saw, I offered it up and I used a couple of scraps of wood at the bottom to get the verticals sitting plumb to the opening. I got an F-clamp on to hold it in place and to stop it blowing over in the wind. And then I could scribe the arc at the top, and while it's there I can also scribe the verticals too, because I want the gate to fit inside the opening with maybe about a 5 to 10mm gap on each side or thereabouts, and I want a decent gap at the bottom of the gate so that it doesn't get too much rainfall splashback. And with it positioned where I want it, I can use a spirit level to mark a nice horizontal line at the bottom. I can then get it back into the workshop and cut it to size, starting with trimming off the bottom. I used the jigsaw to cut the arc, and you'll see I'm cutting on the inside of the line. Here I'm using my Shinto rasp to refine the shape of the curve. This rasp has lots of little teeth and cuts really quite aggressively, so it's nice and quick. It has a coarse side and a not so coarse side, and it's the not so coarse side that I'm using here. Links to this and my other tools can be found at the My Tools link in the description box. Here I'm doing some calculations to figure out and mark up where I want to make some vertical cuts, purely for aesthetics. I just want the gate to look a little bit more traditional and a little less like just a piece of MDF. I make the same marks at the top of the gate, and then I can line up my track and make a cut with the blade set to cut about 2mm deep into the 18mm material. I can then flip it over and mark up the other side based on the cuts I'd already made, and do the same again. And at this point I can trim the edges based on the scribe marks that I made earlier. Next I offered up the gate again, this time using a couple of bricks to space it off the floor, and I can figure out where I want my hinges to be. I'm doing this because I want to make sure that I secure them into brick rather than the mortar in between the bricks. Now as it happens, I ended up buying some different hinges to use for this gate, as I decided these ones looked a little bit too small. I'll still use the smaller ones though for another project, and stay tuned until the end of the video to see that. And I can start cutting some more of the Tricoya Extreme MDF into strips at the table saw. I'm going to use these as bracing pieces on the back of the door, which will give me more material to secure the hinges into later on. As the Tricoya Extreme MDF should be stable enough in itself, I don't actually need to add any diagonal braces as you would do traditionally with a gate to prevent it from sagging over time. I then decided it'd be good to cut one edge to an angle to help the rain run off it, so I tilt my table saw blade and trim one edge. And then I cut them to length at the miter saw, and I'm going to use some polyurethane glue to stick them in place. This works great for exterior use. I make sure that they'll be level by measuring up from the bottom edge, and then I secure them with a few galvanised nails in the middle and a clamp at each end. This glue foams up, and after about half an hour it's dry enough to scrape away. and I used the Shinto rasp again to flush up the ends of the braces. I decided to add a roundover to the edges using my router. This is a bearing guided roundover bit, so it just follows the edges. And then I sanded all the end grain using 80 and then 120 grit by hand. I didn't bother sanding the faces as they are already really nice and smooth. I brushed away all the dust and then I can start applying paint. First across the grooves to try and get paint coverage in there, and then I'm brushing it in along the length of the gate. This is an exterior grade paint guaranteed for 4 years. I got this on Amazon and I'll link to that below too. We went for grey to tie in with the colour that we painted our bungalow with. I gave it 3 coats in total and gave it a light rub down in between coats with 400 grit abrasive paper just to keep it nice and smooth. And at this point I can now get the hinges fitted to the braces. I'm using the screws that came with the hinges even though they're not great quality. And I added a coach bolt to the square hole at the end of the hinge. These rusty screws on the hardware from the old gate did not want to budge, so I tacked them with the grinder in the end. I clamped a piece of wood to the archway just to help hold the gate in place, popped it on top of the bricks again and then wedged in a piece of MDF on the right hand side so that the gate was positioned hard up against the post on the left hand side where the hinges are going to be. And that left a pretty consistent gap on the right from top to bottom, so I was happy with that. So next I offered up the brackets that hold the pins of the hinges, and I'm using masking tape just so it's easier to see the marks. I used my SDS drill to drill the holes, added some rawl plugs, and then I can screw them in place. The screws I'm using here are just generic wood screws, so not ideal for exterior use. I'm just using what I had to hand, and I'll probably replace these at a later date. That being said, even though they will rust, screws tend to last for years and years outside, so I'm not going to worry about it too much. I can then see how it swings, and it looked pretty good. I bought this latch called a Suffolk latch. I got it on Amazon and I'll leave links below to everything I used. There are a lot of these on Amazon with really bad reviews, as a lot of the cheaper ones are made of flimsy metal apparently, but this one seemed to have a good reputation and I was certainly happy with it. I'd never fitted one of these before and it didn't come with any instructions, so I just kind of figured it out bit by bit. There's a rivet on the back where the lever pivots, so I removed some material with a 12mm drill bit to create some clearance for that to twist. So far so good. Now I can figure out what height the handle on the opposite side needs to be at, so that the handle part can lift up the lever high enough for the gate to open. I then need to cut a slot for the handle lever to go through, so I did that just by drilling a few holes. And then when I'm happy with the position I can screw it in place. Later on I'll be adding some more hardware to the gate so that we can lock it, but for now I'm going to call it done. I made another gate in pretty much the same way, just using different dimensions for the other side of our house, using some more of the same material. I fitted that one to a hardwood batten, which I also painted and secured to the wall of our bungalow, and it replaces this sagging gate which was there before. This thing was really badly made. It had no bracing, hence why it sagged over time, and also whoever fitted this mounted the hinges to the cant rails on the fence panels, and that's bent the fence panels out of shape over time. But anyway, this gate has helped to tidy up the area a little bit. So this is just about the quickest and easiest way to make a gate that I could possibly think of. It actually took me less than a day and a half to build, paint and install both of the gates. When working with real timber, there are so many things to take into consideration because wood is a natural product that shrinks, expands, moves, twists and warps. And that can make it both time consuming and difficult to work with for exterior projects like this. You may need to dry out the timber prior to using it, depending on how dry it is when you get it, and then it might twist out of shape due to there being tension in the wood, sometimes to the point where it could end up even being unusable. These are all very real experiences that I've had myself when I built my shed that I built last year. I'll leave links to the videos about that project in the description box below if you want to check them out. Real timber also degrades over time due to the effect of weathering from UV rays from the sun and moisture from the rain, causing it to grey in colour and eventually start rotting away unless it's really well maintained over time. You also might have knots and imperfections in the wood to deal with that may bleed through the paint if you decide to paint it, of course, or worse, dead knots that may fall out of the timber over time. Using an exterior grade MDF like Tricoya Extreme resolves pretty much all of those issues because you're working with a stable and consistent material with a really long lifespan and a multitude of potential different uses. Now, as you might expect, it's not cheap, but for the tradesman or professional, if you take this gate project as an example, using a material like this actually makes a lot of sense. Even when you consider just the labour costs alone, which can easily be £150–200 per day plus here in the UK, depending on where you're based. Just those costs alone for the time it would take to make gates using real timber, doing all of the joinery, not to mention all the inconveniences like having the space and time to dry out the timber prior to use, or the concerns about wood expansion and contraction. I think that's when you realise the value in using a composite material like the Tricoya Extreme product. And speaking as someone who recently spent 5 days building some gates using real timber and having been faced with the issues of trying to get it dry enough to use, you actually could very easily find yourself thinking, can I afford not to use it? I know I'm going to get asked about the cost of this material, so I phoned around a few of my local timber and builders merchants, and for a full regular sized 8 foot by 4 foot sheet that's 18mm thick, you should expect to pay somewhere between £250–270 currently. So that's just a rough guide. Obviously prices will vary depending on where you buy it and location. I'd like to thank Medite SMARTPLY for supporting this project. Don't forget to check out the members area, link in the description box below. Please subscribe to my channel for more weekly woodworking videos. If you'd like to help support the channel and get exclusive content, early access to my videos, free project plans and cut lists, and a name credit at the end of my videos, you can find links to YouTube channel membership and my Patreon page in the description box below. Thank you for watching.